Hello and welcome. I'm Mikhail Yerezaran, and today I'll present our work, Texture and Shape-Based Adversarial Attacks for Overhead Image Vehicle Detection. This research explores practical adversarial methods against vehicle detectors in aerial imagery. Robust vehicle detection in aerial imagery is essential for a range of real-world applications, from traffic management and urban planning to disaster response. Modern object detectors like YOLO and RetinaNet have achieved strong performance thanks to advances in deep learning. Given the importance of these applications, ensuring detector robustness is as crucial as improving accuracy. Adversarial attacks are commonly used to evaluate robustness, but much prior work focuses on maximizing attack success without considering real-world visibility. For example, digitally adding noise can easily fool a model, but such attacks are unrealistic for remote sensing from satellites or drones. In these cases, the issue relates more to security vulnerabilities than to robustness. In our work, we reverse the perspective by examining how physically plausible, easily implementable modifications to the vehicle itself affect detection performance. In summary, we investigate how attack effectiveness changes as attacks become more practical. There are three main types of adversarial attacks. Digital attacks make tiny, often imperceptible changes directly to image pixels. Physical attacks modify real-world objects to fool detectors. Simulated attacks involve visible changes tested in virtual environments. Our work focuses on simulated attacks, applying realistic and physically plausible modifications in a high-fidelity simulation. Many prior studies focus mainly on how successful an attack is, proposing patterns or 3D shapes that would be very difficult to reproduce in the real world. We take a different approach by emphasizing practicality, constraining both texture and shape changes so they can be realistically applied to vehicles using minimal equipment. Physical adversarial attacks in aerial imagery are rare. One example by Du et al. Uses adversarial patches placed on vehicles. Unlike that, we modify the entire vehicle, apply stricter constraints, and test our approach in a physics-based simulator that closely reflects real-world conditions. This slide summarizes our method for generating adversarial vehicles in aerial imagery under practical constraints. Starting with the pipeline, we use PyTorch 3D to render realistic synthetic aerial images of vehicles with adversarial shapes or textures. The vehicles come from a GAN-based mesh generator retrained to produce semantic segmentation masks, allowing accurate placement in background scenes sampled from Google Maps. These images feed into an ensemble of vehicle detectors. We optimize the vehicle mesh or texture to minimize detection confidence across all models. We achieve this by setting the ground truth labels to empty in the same loss function used to train the models. This reflects the attack goal, making vehicles undetectable. For inference, we generate paired original and adversarial images using a physics-based renderer simulating real conditions. These images are tested on the detector ensemble to compute the average attack success rate. Texture constraints are a key part of our method. Unconstrained textures represent the standard unconstrained approach. Pixelization limits spatial resolution, with texture blocks roughly 15 centimeters wide, reflecting practical printing or painting limits. Color constraints restrict the number of colors via palette learning or fixed palettes, making textures more printable. Masking limits camouflage to certain parts, avoiding windows or lights to maintain operability. We also impose shape constraints, enforcing symmetry and limiting perturbation sizes to keep shapes plausible. Overall, our method creates realistically deployable adversarial vehicles that work across multiple detectors while respecting physical and practical limits. Building on the earlier texture and shape constraints, we run three attack types: texture only, shape only, and combine attacks. For texture attacks, we test all combinations of pixelization, masking, and color constraints plus an unconstrained baseline. The slide shows how each constraint visually affects the vehicle mesh. As expected, tighter constraints lead to more practical, real-world implementations. Shape-only attacks perturb the vehicle mesh geometry at varying magnitudes. All deformations are outward-facing, meaning the geometry only expands from the original surface. This reflects a practical limitation. Attaching objects to vehicles is feasible, but removing parts is unsafe and impractical. Combined attacks jointly optimize shape and texture using two strategies. Sequential, optimize texture first, then freeze it and optimize shape. And parallel, alternate between texture and shape optimization in loops until convergence. On the slide, we show examples of the least and most practical shapes from combined attacks, illustrating the range of outcomes across constraints. In addition to adversarial effectiveness, we evaluate how practical these camouflages are in real-world settings. We define three qualitative criteria. Production cost, how expensive it is to create the camouflage, including any shape or texture changes. Difficulty of installation, how complex or labor-intensive it is to apply the camouflage to the vehicle. Practical methods should be easy to deploy. And difficulty of operation, how much the modification interferes with normal vehicle use. For example, placing large structures on the roof may fool detectors, but could block visibility or access, making it impractical. These three factors together define overall practicality. In short, a practical camouflage should be cheap to produce, simple to install, and minimally disruptive to operation. To assess real-world feasibility, we assign practicality scores from -1 to +1 based on cost, installation effort, and impact on vehicle use. The scoring is qualitative and heuristic, with further details provided in the supplementary material. First, we consider a rooftop sticker from Du et al. It's inexpensive and easy to apply, so it scores +1 for both cost and installation. Since it doesn't affect shape or operation, it gets +1 for operation and zeros for shape. Next is a texture-only camouflage from our method using pixelization, color limits, and masking. It earns +1 for cost and installation. Square color stickers are cheap and easy to apply, especially with a 3D vehicle view. Masking avoids critical areas like windows and lights, so we assign +1 for operation. Shape scores remain 0. The third example is a combined camouflage, pixelized and color limited, but without masking and with minor shape changes. It scores +1 for cost and installation, as fabrication is still simple. But without masking, there is potential to obstruct visibility, so we assign -1 for operation. For shape, we assign -1 across all criteria. Even modest shape changes tend to be costly, time-consuming, and interfere with vehicle use. On the slide, you can see the resulting practicality scores. The first two examples score similarly, but effectiveness varies. Du et al.'s sticker was tested at high geospatial resolution, but it would likely struggle at our lower resolution. The third example, while strong adversarially, shows a clear trade-off in practicality, especially due to shape changes and lack of masking. This illustrates a key tension. Improving attack strength often reduces real-world deployability. This slide presents the quantitative results of our adversarial attacks. At the top, we show results for texture-only attacks. Below that are randomly generated textures that satisfy constraints but are not optimized. The first key result is that optimized textures clearly outperform random ones, even under the same constraints. This shows that optimization is essential for adversarial success. Constraints alone are not enough. Shape-only attacks also achieve strong success rates, both with differentiable and physics-based renderers. We use the P1 score to identify the best trade-off between performance and practicality. Details are in the paper. Combined attacks optimize both shape and texture. These achieve better practicality scores than shape-only attacks, since the texture reduces reliance on extreme shape changes. Finally, combined attacks recover much of the performance lost under texture constraints, in some cases matching unconstrained baselines. This highlights the strength of joint optimization in creating both effective and realistic camouflages. This slide shows all 12 optimized texture camouflages we produced under different constraint combinations, including pixelization, masking, and color limits. The goal here is to give a visual sense of how constraints impact not just practicality, but also the structure of the textures themselves. When we compare these to random textures under the same constraints, the difference is clear. Random textures look noisy or repetitive, but they lack the adversarial structure that the optimized ones develop. This highlights the constraints alone aren't enough. Optimization is essential. Finally, we visualize shape-only and combined camouflages. Shape-only attacks often require unrealistically large modifications to be effective, which limits their practicality. When combined with texture, we often see smaller shape changes, since the texture contributes to the attack. This makes the combined approach far more viable for real-world deployment. On this slide, we show examples of images with camouflaged vehicles rendered into realistic aerial scenes. These examples illustrate the quality and diversity of the data generated by our pipeline. By simulating different environments and applying practical constraints, we enable robust evaluation of vehicle detectors under realistic conditions. We also found that some constrained textures, particularly those with limited color palettes, can still reduce vehicle visibility, even to human observers. This suggests that certain constraints, while restrictive, don't necessarily eliminate the adversarial effect. That said, the pipeline has limitations. For instance, vehicle placement isn't always semantically accurate. In some cases, vehicles appear on rooftops. These artifacts are relatively infrequent but worth noting when using the data for training or evaluation. To summarize, we proposed a method for generating and evaluating adversarial camouflages for vehicles in aerial imagery, with a focus on real-world practicality. We introduced a framework to assess deployability and analyze the trade-offs between practicality and attack effectiveness. Unconstrained textures are most effective, but often unrealistic. Constrained textures are easier to deploy, but less powerful. However, combining texture and shape modifications helps recover much of the lost performance. Both sequential and parallel optimization strategies perform similarly. We also developed two rendering pipelines, one differentiable and one physics-based, enabling scalable, controlled experiments. Overall, our findings highlight key vulnerabilities in current detection systems, and we hope this work contributes to building more robust and secure remote sensing models. Thank you for watching.